We're back.
Hello there, and thank you for tuning in to the very first episode of Radio Squid Jigger, the place where Thad Brown, that's me, and Josh Howler, a good friend of mine, talk about politics, military deployments, and other related issues that are happening in the world now. This week we talk about a couple of different things, including an air defense system that's named after me, Thad, what's going on in Raqqa and Topka Dam in Syria, as well as how we started doing this whole Squid Jigger thing to start with. So we're very happy you decided to take a listen to this. We would love to hear back from you, either in the comment section of the podcast at josh@squidjigger.com or tcb@squidjigger.com. And one more time, thanks for tuning in and hearing us at... So, this is episode 1, believe it or not, of Radio Squid Jigger. Yay!
Woohoo!
Yay!
Finally got off our asses and did it.
That's okay. We actually finally did it. So, the reason that we're doing this is because how long have the two of us been emailing about military stuff and geopolitics? Like seriously, like again, since there's been email, like 10 years or something. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And
I think we've certainly been talking about that for a long time because you and I are some of the only people that we know that actually pay attention to some of this stuff. Precisely.
And so, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, I think the Squid Jigger nomenclature, I think, came about roughly a year and a half ago.
I actually looked it up, and it was March 13th. So on March 13th of 2015, there was a...
Oh, that's actually, I didn't realize it had been that long. I thought it was 2016.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it was, no, it was 16. You're right, it was 16 because I was in Japan in 2015. Right. March 13th, 2015, there was the Argentinian Coast Guard sunk a Chinese fishing vessel. And I went back and looked, and the reason we started talking about it was we were like, okay, it couldn't have actually been a Chinese fishing vessel, right?
Right. I think we all thought that was like a misprint. Like, you know, the press is like clearly not understanding that situation.
What actually
an Argentinian boat sank a Chinese boat.
Right. Exactly. Like, and it was off the coast of Argentina. It wasn't the Argentinians like, you know, went around the end of South America and like blew something up in the Pacific. This was like off the coast of Argentina. And so we assumed that it was actually like a Chinese, you know, military vessel that was flagged as a fishing vessel, and so we were doing investigation on this, and it turned out no, it was a fucking fishing boat.
Yes. And I remember I was the first person to say like, oh, I think China's just being uppity and just sending like Coast Guard vessels anywhere just to like claim the rest of the world, because at the time they also kind of made a very kind of weird and loose claim to the Antarctic. Even though they don't border it, they were basically saying, well, we have more people than everyone else, therefore we should have a slice of the world's ocean.
Right.
Was more or less literally their statement. And so I kind of assumed like, oh, so they're just going to claim the Antarctic too. But it was an actual fishing, like a legitimate, well, not legitimate perhaps, but like certainly like they had a reason to be there.
Right. They were fishing. they were fishing for squid. So then the two of us started sending emails back and forth, and I think I found video on YouTube of, and again, like the Squid Jigger sounds like a made up name. Like it sounds like something from Urban Dictionary.
Until you found the video, I was just like, that just seems weird.
Right.
Until you actually showed me exactly what it was.
And so, sure enough, like a jigger is a lure. So a squid jigger is a squid fishing boat that uses line lures that they throw out into the water, and then it's a pretty gruesome process. And it turns out that the Chinese overseas fishing fleet pulls in like hundreds of thousands of tons of squid a year from all over the world. So this went from me and Josh being like, oh, we're going to discover the deep, you know, conspiracy of how the Chinese are trying to take over this part of the ocean, and this is going to happen, and there's going to be some sort of international conflict about it, to no, these people just really fucking like squid. And
yeah,
and that was the answer. So then Josh and I sort of keep people on this email list that we run all the time. And we decided we were called the Squid Jiggers because it was the most absurd thing that we'd ever run across. Of all the absurd things that we've run across over the years.
And also it took a couple of days of research on everyone's part to like, you know, like why is this happening? Like, what is the background to like the Argentinians having a naval conflict with the Chinese?
With China over.
Like, it was obscure enough that it actually, and we're just like, wow, we're dorks.
Right.
We're the only people who actually like look this up. Like we actually spent a couple of days figuring out the history and the background for why there are Chinese fishing boats like off the coast of Argentina.
Precisely.
So
and
it's a fantastic like metaphor for what total like foreign policy dorks we are.
Precisely. And then one of the reasons that we threw around the idea of doing this sort of podcast thing for a long time, and then just in this past, like, I think it was 2 weeks, there's an article in the Financial Times and the article in the New York Times literally about Chinese overseas squid fishing and the geopolitics thereof. So we've been tossing around this idea of doing this, and now suddenly, like, you know, like apparently, like there are parts of the ocean. Apparently, the Chinese fishing fleets have now left the coast of Argentina because they took all the squid away from there. And now they're fishing on the other side of South America in the Pacific, off of the coast of Peru and Chile, and off of the coast of Senegal. And they're taking all the squid out of there. So this thing that we talked about a year and a half ago, and we were like, oh wow, who in the world would ever care about this at all? Then, well, we should talk about this on the internet, and like, oh no, God, who would care about it? Now the Financial Times and the New York Times care about it. So we decided
we were doing it before it was cool.
Exactly.
I believe actually Even this week, I believe you mentioned off the coast of Africa. I believe there was a Chinese boat just busted for illegal fishing, like somewhere close to Somalia, just like this week.
Yep, exactly.
It's. I'm amazed at the depth and breadth of how far their fishing fleet goes. Like, I mean, it's like the U.S. Navy and the Chinese fishing fleet. They rule the waves. You know, like.
Yep.
It's amazing how far those people go to like fish.
And to get some really, I mean, and it's just, I mean, again, if you watch the videos, the squid that they're fishing for are like 1.5 feet, 2 feet long. So somehow they are getting hundreds of thousands of tons, like 1 12-inch squid at a time.
As you mentioned, the mechanism they use to collect it is brutal. It's basically like, I mean, when you see a squid jigger, it's actually just a series of those metal conveyor belts that like push bagels through like a toaster oven, like at a shitty hotel, but except they're all with lures pulling up stuff constantly.
Yes.
And then never ending like I mean it's kind of one of the most brutal I mean, I'm sure there's dragnets that are worse, but I mean perhaps this is more visible, but it's like a boat that like on both of its sides is a constant conveyor belt of stuff being pulled out of the water.
Yes.
It's like one of the most industrial levels of fishing that I've ever really seen.
I
wasn't even aware of it until like the Argentinians shot at one of these.
Exactly. So that is the history of the squid jigger. That's how we got our name, and that's why we're talking about this. But we're not just going to talk about squid. There are going to be lots of other fun topics that we're going to talk about, and we put together a couple of those. But the important thing to remember about this is that we only did this because the Financial Times got interested. All right, that's the only reason
we finally got off our asses. Like, okay, if like several other major publications are going to talk about the stuff that we were like investigating, maybe we should make a thing out of this.
Maybe we should talk about it. And my other theory is, I was thinking about this at my desk at work the other day. So I was like, you know, if there are 1 out of every billion people in the world actually give a shit about this like we do, that means that there are 5 other people we need to find. And they're not just going to walk into the bar. They're not going to walk up to our desk. Like this is a very rare group of people who will give a shit about this. So we're going to use the internet to go out and find them and hope that they're not one of the like 4 billion people, or they're not all in the 4 billion people who don't have the internet. So our point is 1 in a billion. We've still got 5 to find. At least that's my theory.
I like our chances.
That's all right. And also, just since this actually will eventually go on the internet and be public, we also did buy the domain name, so we own squidjigger.com. There's a delightful website by a band in Maine called the Squid Jiggers, plural. And of course, we encourage you to check out all Squid Jigger related materials. But we own the website. Josh and I are both tech workers, so getting a website up isn't all that difficult. So if anyone cares about any of this and finds anything we say interesting, and we do mean anything, you can email Josh at squidjigger.com or TCB, that's me, it's my initials, at squidjigger.com, and the emails will go directly to our delightful inboxes. And that'll mean if we do get an email, that means we will have already found one of the 5 other people on planet Earth who care about this. So
I like how you've like narrowed it down to like, wow, my chances of like meeting the love of my life are actually a little bit better than us like actually meeting the people who care about what we're talking about. Like, thank you. All right, so I mean, are we ready to? Have we gotten the advertising out? Are we ready to dig into it?
Okay, so we are going to talk about. It's pronounced Takba. Is that correct? No. Yes, Takba.
I don't know, but let's go with that.
Let's go with that. And that is a place where the United States has been not just sending money or guns or intel to people who are fighting in Syria, but we've actually been moving people around and so forth on that, right? So explain to us what's going on there.
And I think I think the moving people around that you mentioned is huge in that like. We loaded up helicopters and had an air assault across Lake Assad to an island just north of where the city and the dam are, and actually delivered people, like, which, I mean, people think, like, whatever, we have helicopters lying around, but what you're effectively saying is, like, we trust these fighters with our lives in that, like, any jerk who, like, pulls the pin on a grenade is going to, like, make our Chinook run into the ground with our entire air crew of special forces dudes.
Right.
Like, this whole thing where they just announced in the last 2 or 3 days, like, we're going to arm the Kurds. I was like, you've been arming the Kurds. Like, there's, like, footage of C-17s landing inside the, like, Kobani, like, canton of, like, Kurdistani, what effectively is Kurdistan of Syria. Like, this isn't a new thing. You're just announcing it to annoy the crap out of the Turks.
Right.
And we have like put people on helicopters and done an air mobile assault with them, which I think is actually kind of unprecedented in U.S. history to actually like take a foreign force and like chopper them into a hot LZ.
Right.
Like that's kind of like Vietnam level of like we're involved.
Right, and that's so officially the United States. I mean, the United States has basically admitted that we have. I love your term for this, Josh. We have guys in floppy hats. So we have special ops guys who work for whoever. They like who writes their American paycheck. Who knows? But these are top level special operations trained guys who are sort of like the best of the best, and they've been in there for a while now, and we know that. But now we're talking about an even greater degree, right? So those guys, I assume, sort of take care of themselves, right? So they're flown in with very very small amounts of support. But if
one of them like goes missing, you could deny it.
Right. But
now we're talking about like helicopters now.
Right. You put a helicopter in there, and that means you got to fuel it. You got to make sure the pilot has food. Like this is not just you don't just fly a helicopter in from Kuwait. Like that's not how this works.
No, they had to have been hanging out there for a while ahead of time to have a forward arming and refueling point. So like they were. It's not just something like, I mean, people probably think that like you could just like, oh, we just dropped a couple helicopters there. Like, no, these guys knew the area. They would have trained on the area. And I think this is a good time to bring in the Rangers. And the fact that the Rangers are running around in Stryker LAVs, which is not part of their normal kit.
Okay, so
which means that these guys were trained on armored personnel carriers they were not previously like issued just for this operation. There's like at least a battalion of Rangers hanging out with like kit that they don't normally use.
Right. So
on top of that.
So let's stop here and talk a little bit about both of those two things. So because again, I know more about this than maybe your average person on the street, but I don't know 10% of what you know about these things. So ranger groups normally would not have. Okay, let's start. What's a striker? Because I mean, you can look them up on the interwebs.
A striker is a armored personnel carrier that was made for the it's in the same family as the LAV that the Marines use for reconnaissance. It's a four-wheeled armored personnel carrier, not unsimilar to a BTR-80 of Russian make.
Right. So,
they look very.
And for someone who knows nothing about this, it looks like a combination of a tank and a Humvee.
Yes. Or actually, yeah, pretty much.
And then
and it's important to, and the reason I actually bring them up as like a significant thing is that the Rangers ordinarily deploy a super light infantry that make the airborne look like really posh. They don't generally have trucks. They don't have like the biggest thing they're generally issued is like a Land Rover, literally like a Land Rover. They have like they drape machine guns off of it, but generally they don't have like armor, they don't have like howitzers, they don't have any of that kind of stuff that even the 82nd Airborne would have. Right. They're expected to be commandos that are operating super light, that are airdropped onto something. Even back in the Cold War days, they would be their mission would be like, I drop like a battalion of these guys onto an airfield and they fight it out for like a night, they take it over, and then we back it up with either an armored thrust or like the actual 82nd Airborne as backup. But the 82nd Airborne would be considered a heavy unit compared to the Rangers.
Right.
So the fact that they're operating with 20-ton APCs is a new thing for them that they are not normally associated with or trained for.
Right.
Which means it implies a certain amount of prep.
Right.
It's not something not like they just dropped out of the sky and that happened.
Right, and also we don't know for sure when this happened, but
no.
From what you can read from the sort of open source tools, these guys were the Rangers that we're talking about were shipped out of San Diego like October last year or something like that, right?
Yes, so, and also the first time I really saw flags flying was the Man Beach operation,
right, north
of Man Beach. Where all of a sudden, like, it's kind of like, oh, we have no troops in Syria, and then all of a sudden there are armored personnel carriers, like, with huge flags flying like at the Trump rally.
Right.
It's like out of nowhere.
Right. So, and I think that the point that we started making about this offline was you don't decide to do this 2 weeks before it happens.
The fuel associated with because it's not like we have a main line into Syria shipwise, logistically. Like usually you would be like, even the Russians they have to like drag their stuff like through the Bosphorus, the Black Sea. Like we don't have like a direct line to that, which means that there's a whole bunch of cargo flights supporting fuel for that. Like forget ammunition, just fuel for you can imagine that, an 8x8 armored personnel carrier is like not super, Prius like.
Exactly.
It's fuel.
It's not a hybrid. You gotta get some gas in that puppy.
So this was a really premeditated thing that was just unpublicized that I think goes back to the Obama administration, and it was only when they started flying flags to like keep the Turks and the FSA away after the Al-Bab operation.
Right.
I think it's when we first saw them.
Right. And also this is probably an issue for an even longer topic and even longer discussion. But the fact that there were Russian regular troops and then U.S. very regular troops, in fact, elite regular troops, in that part of Syria was specifically so that I don't know. I assume was specifically so that the Turks couldn't just shell something with artillery. They'd wind up killing Russians or they wind up killing Americans. And then
my impression was, as much as the Americans and the Russians are complaining about politics right now, it seemed militarily around Manbij that it was a absolute joint effort. Perhaps not at the political level. It might have been like a Department of Defense like handshake with like whatever the Russian equivalent is. But like the Russians are covering the eastern front of Manbij, and the Rangers are covering the northern front, and it's been stable since like, January.
Right.
Like the Turks haven't advanced, and like the Russians and the Americans haven't gotten into a fracas over it. It's like a quiet agreement that like, no, you don't cross this line.
Right.
And
right.
both the Russians and Americans agree with it, which is like, it's amazingly how nobody publicizes with all the Russian stuff going on right now that like basically the Russians are backing the same Kurds that we are, and that we're kind of in agreement on that part at least. It's kind of weird.
Certainly, that's certainly the way it looks on the ground. Is that whoever is making decisions about who goes where and who pitches a tent where and who sticks a flag in the ground where.
Yeah,
that they've just agreed on this, and this is what's going to happen. And I think from a military standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, neither of us would say that's a bad idea.
I think you might be right that it might be a professional agreement amongst professional militaries and less of a absolutely political agreement.
Right.
It might be a handshake, be like, okay, you guys are badass, we have the same things in common. We're going to do this, and as long as nobody vetoes us like up the food chain, we're just going to do this. Right. Especially on the American side, I do get the impression that like the Department of Defense is pretty much running their own show in Syria right now. As long as they don't like fuck anything up, they have a license to kill, I think.
Right. Well, that's and again that would mesh with the fact that I think there's I don't think I'm going out on too much of a limb to say that there's not a whole lot of day-to-day oversight on foreign policy issues right now in the United States.
The State Department is somewhat emaciated.
Yes, they're having a bit of a tough time. They're a little undermanned, understaffed, I should say, to be more politically correct about it. They're a little bit understaffed these days, and are working on other stuff.
So that's what we have on the ground. So I mean, let's move on to Raqqa.
Right, and I guess the whole point of that was to sort of flesh out like this is a level of involvement by the U.S. that is dramatically larger than it was before, and is also perhaps a bit underreported. Just because you have to do some fishing around on just looking at whose picture is where. To figure out what's going on. So, but anyway, the entire, as you say, the entire point of this is that we're supposed to is that the plan is to take over Raqqa, which is supposedly the capital of the caliphate that is in charge of that part of Syria. And again, you've actually looked at the maps on this stuff. So one of the things you said right away was it's just farmland. Like there is no place to hide.
Not until you get to the city proper.
Right. So
just literally before like in the last 24 hours since when I was like reading up to like prep this conversation, like they lost another like 30% of the area around Raqqa, but it's like flat open land that really suggests itself to, parking an AC-130 over it and just dropping 40 millimeter and 105 millimeter on any jerk with a rifle. So and I think it'll move quickly to a complete Mosul-style siege, where it's like right up against the city.
Right, and that's and that's where suddenly a lot more people are going to start dying on both sides.
Yes,
but again, there's no. I mean, the one of the discussions that was had a long time ago when Mosul was started was. That there are a lot of ways to get out. And again, if you look at the maps, there aren't too many places to go from Raqqa. I mean, you can basically go south. And south is pretty much, I mean,
well, the bridges,
I've never been there.
Have been dropped, so it's actually really difficult, quite honestly. If you're a civilian, you basically have the same problem of like, you have to walk across open farmland in one direction, and the Euphrates River and the bridges were dropped, long ago, as you might imagine. Okay. There's no way to go. There's no way to like get across the river unless you're going to like swim it or boat it.
So, okay, that's actually news to me. I did not know that. So let me how big is Raqqa? How many people are in Raqqa?
Raqqa, it's much smaller than Mosul.
Okay.
But it is easier. I don't know the exact population, but it's easily like 5 to 10 times the Tabquad next to the dam.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, it's not a small place, but it also is not remotely as big as Mosul, and it doesn't. And unlike Mosul, it doesn't have a really old city
Okay.
where it's narrow alleyways that are ancient, which is as you might imagine, kind of hard to fight. It's a horrible fight to like be in like a 2-yard wide like alleyway. And,
Right.
like,
Right. And then
so Raqqa doesn't have that ancient city feel. It's a much more open place. It's let's go with like the Denver of Syria. It's not very large, and it's much more spread out. And the area around it is absolutely flat as a pancake. Actually, maybe Boulder.
Okay, sure, yeah.
That's on a flat plain.
Right.
That doesn't have terrain. And on one side, it's backed by the river. And the bridges have been dropped. So your back is against the wall in that direction. I mean, you could swim it, you could boat it, but as far as logistics is concerned, your back is against, to the south, Raqqa is completely cut off.
Right.
Even though the other shore isn't actually unfriendly, ISIS still controls it. It's just logistically, you're just it's like a Stalingrad situation.
Right.
You're not gonna.
How do you get there?
So I think you're going to see the whole place fold up to right against the city quickly.
And then the issue becomes, how many people are going to stay there, and actually from what you're saying, and I think this would match with what's happening in Mosul. How many people will stay there knowing they're going to die, and knowing that what they're going to do is they're going to take out as many of the other people coming into the city as they can, and that's and from what I can see and what I understand and what you're saying, that's like we're basically at that point that as soon as the Kurdish and U.S. forces decide to drive up there, that's where we're going to be. So you can surround the city, you can do an old medieval siege on it, but that's not how the militaries do things these days. So we could just sit there and wait for 2 years. I mean, that would have been the very traditional Mesopotamian way to fight this war. It's just dig a big ditch around the side of it and wait.
And as I mentioned once before, like you also could just line up like 2 squadrons of B-52s and bomb it from one end to the other, and that would pretty much solve the problem too. But we're also not, we don't fight wars that way either.
Right, anymore. Exactly. So it's going to be.
I feel it will go quickly because I feel like the resistance in Mosul has completely collapsed as of this moment. They're like a neighborhood like gets conquered. I mean, house fighting is always slow and ridiculous. I mean, if you look at Stalingrad, there was like a prolonged like 2-month fight over like the tractor factory.
That's right.
Like between the Germans and the Russians. Like when like one single thing in like one block was actually like a sustained campaign. So like city fighting is always slow, especially if you actually care about not killing everyone. But I feel that Mosul is just about to fall to the Iraqis, and it can't be a confidence booster to Raqqa. And I feel like anyone of any importance already left. The place has been cordoned off by the Kurds, except for the river, for a while now. Like it's been isolated as a pocket by the Kurds for like 4 or 5 months. Like since the beginning of the year, it's been isolated, and all the major roads have been cut. So unless you're swimming or boating across the Euphrates, you're not getting out of Raqqa. So I just don't feel like there's a huge amount of confidence of the people that are fighting there, especially after Mosul, which was easily the biggest thing that ISIS ever had, is like basically about to be reduced to like the last fighter like inside this week, if not like this month.
Right.
I kind of feel Raqqa will actually fall a lot quicker than people think it will.
Okay.
Because I don't think there's any fight left in that group. I've heard reports of like 20,000 people leaving it that were civilians being, handled by, and also like I believe it's worth saying that the Syrian Defense Forces, which I mean is basically just a nice way of saying the YPG, that is the Kurds that are handling that area, are really good about handling everyone of every ethnicity, whereas there's a lot of ethnic strife and ethnic revenge going on right now. Like, they generally are just like, all right, well, if you're not against this, like, it's okay if you're not armed. Like, I feel like they do a really good job of, like, welcome. Like, nobody really, like, feels weird surrendering to a Kurd, as opposed to, like, well, are you Shiite? Are you Sunni? Like, the Kurds generally just seem to endear themselves to people who are just like, okay, but you're not ISIS and you're not going to kill me. Good enough, like, kind of thing.
And that's and one of the things that I think that we've seen fairly consistently is that because the Kurdish forces represent a minority in the country, and I mean, there have been situations where, I mean, in fact, I think this might even have been about Raqqa a couple of months ago, where the Kurdish forces said, you know, like, we'll take the city, but we're not going to hold it because it's not our town, it's not our people, and we don't want to sort of take over a city and be forced to sort of maintain peace in a place where everyone hates us.
Actually, that's a really good point. And to that point, just in the last 24 hours, I've heard that the Tabaqua area where the dam is actually going to be handed over to locals that are actually pro-government. And I think it's also really worth noting that the Kurds have a tiny enclave in, I believe, in the Aleppo area that the Syrians are not, the Syrian government is not overrunning. And there is also Syrian government areas in the Kurdish area that are not being overrun. There is definitely a kind of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Like, we don't need to, like, as a big counterpoint to ISIS in Deir Zor, down the Euphrates River from Raqqa. That's where, like, they've been trying to fight. The ISIS has been trying to, like, dislodge the Syrian government from that area and the airbase there for 3 years.
Right. Since, I mean, and, like, exactly for years.
It is absolutely the Kaysan of Syria. Like, at some point, if there's ever a free media in Syria, there will be a movie about, like, the defense of, like, that place, because It's been like 3 years of only getting air resupply and nothing else, and that's it. And, like, trying to hold out in an absolutely isolated area. But it's not like that with the Kurds and the Syrian army. They seem to have an agreement, like, okay, well, we won't do this, we won't overrun this place, and you don't overrun this place, and we're good. I think this is really important to note for post-Civil War. Like, these guys basically have kind of acknowledged that they're both going to exist.
Right, and I think that we have seen that the Kurdish forces are seeing this through the lens of, we want either independence or a much higher degree of sort of federal control over our own areas. But I don't think that there is some sort of Kurdish nationalist idea that we're going to take over Syria. I don't think they want that. And so
I think they're both. I think they're both I think both militarily they're about the most effective force in country outside of Hezbollah, but also politically, I think they're very savvy and are realistic. And they're like, okay, our end game is, like, if we control the dam and we hand it over to them, if we control this area and we say we're going to be, semi-autonomous but not, like, truly autonomous, we can get away with whatever we want, especially with American and Russian backing.
Right.
But
exactly.
There's an incredible practicality. Like, they are very, whereas other Syrian rebel groups seem to be, like, assuming that, like, oh, we're going to fight to the death. Like, they seem to be looking at the end game.
I think that's true, and I think that we've also seen that in other parts of the conflict in the Middle East with Kurdish groups in particular. And I think, at some point maybe we should take some time to actually talk about the history of that. The Syrian,
that's definitely that could easily be its own conversation for a long time. Yeah.
The Syrian groups. One of the things that I find, and actually this probably I think we should close this up. But the Syrian Kurdish groups are also especially savvy in the way that they deal with Western press. My favorite part of that being, you can always find someone, if you're a press photographer, you can always find someone in the YPG to take a picture of the women's resistance units.
Yes.
you can all like they will get that picture on the freaking
They have sniper
Peoria
units.
Daily
They have
Gazette.
machine gun units. Yeah, and
Yes,
they're all women.
they're all women.
And they claim they do it, and actually I think there might be some grounds for this, but they claim that like ISIS particularly hates to be killed by women because they feel emasculating.
Of course they do.
But I think much more. I think it is, as you say, it's a PR move.
It's great
because
PR.
It makes them look like the most progressive, and to be honest, they probably are.
They are
like,
exactly.
Not that there's a huge standard in the region,
right.
but they go out of their way to prove that they are the most progressive, like, cultural element in the Syrian civil war, and it does play well.
It plays.
And I actually kind of want to bring up Hezbollah again, in that like they're both PR driven groups that understand that like Western media is a thing that they have to control the spin of, that they need to like have a good image of, and I think they're both media savvy groups.
Absolutely. And like I said, you can always get a picture of a young, fairly attractive Kurdish woman in a uniform with a Kalashnikov. If you're a reporter, they'll find you one.
Like I can't wait for that dating app to come out, because
that's right.
Datekurds.com.
Kurdish Tinder.
Dateypg.com. Like,
that's right.
That. Like, trust me. I am waiting for that.
We're waiting.
All right, I think we've kind of beaten that to death. I think we need to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is, why are you hanging out in South Korea?
Yeah, well,
I mean, seriously, man, you're causing a lot of tension.
I'm causing a lot of problems there. And the thing is, this is not the first time I've caused problems in Asia. Not by any stretch of the imagination. I have spent a lot of time causing problems. However, to be honest, this is the first time I've caused any serious problems in South Korea. I was in South Korea once. I was in South Korea for 2 days. Actually, let me. This may not make the make the.
Were you on a golf course at any point in that time?
I was I was never on a golf course, but this is a funny quick story, and like I say, we may cut this out. But I was living in Hong Kong, and I had a customer, a hedge fund that was in Seoul, and I had a flight that was booked, and because of some trouble getting there, I wound up not even being able to get to take a day to sleep in Hong Kong. So I flew from Boston to Montreal to Hong Kong, so that's like 28 hours. And then went home, dropped off my suitcase, went back to the airport, and flew to Seoul. So I've been on the road for like 38 hours or something like that. Then I got 2 hours of sleep, and I had to show up at their office and like do computer stuff. So you can imagine, God. Yeah, and I was probably drunk most of that 38 hours. So I hadn't slept, and I was 16 hours or 14 hours out of my time zone, and presumably disastrously hungover, and had to turn up with a bunch of hedge funds.
Slight side note: after slipping 6 nips of gin onto an Air China flight, I am definitely not allowed to sing "Springtime for Hitler" ever again on a flight to Beijing. But anyway, carry on.
Carry on. The reason Josh is talking about me being deployed to South Korea is because there has been this has been going on also for years. There is a weapon system called THAAD, which also happens to be my name, and it's spelled exactly the same except for one extra A, so I think I get to take that.
It's also, and it's pronounced exactly like your name.
Exactly.
When anyone in the military talks about it, it's like, hey, it's THAAD.
Hey, THAAD. What are we doing with THAAD about that? So there's been all these articles that I've been posting on my social media stuff where, like, new South Korean president reconsiders THAAD deployment. And I, of course, respond like, why are you reconsidering? I mean, I think a THAAD deployment's a great idea.
I'll make your breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a really good boyfriend. So I've been having a lot of fun with that. But let's actually talk about this with some degree of seriousness. What is THAAD? What is the Terminal High Altitude Aerial Defense? I mean, obviously it's me, but other than that, what is it?
THAAD is a surface-to-air missile system that is specifically targeted ballistic missiles.
Okay.
Like it's not like a thing like the Patriot system in Iraq. They used to, then they made new modifications to the surface-to-air system that shoots at planes. That's the Patriot, and there's the PAC-3, and there's there's a whole bunch of that where it's basically like taking your car and, like, oh, I want to try and run this on a racetrack, so I should probably put like a roll cage and like a safety belt into it. Whereas that is like actually from the get-go designed from scratch to be something that shoots at ballistic missiles. It's a race car that should not be street legal. It is like, it is something that is just made to shoot at ballistic missiles. That's its only reason for existing. It's the only target set that it is equipped to deal with.
Right. So, for example, we hear a lot in the press about. I think the code name is the Iron Dome in Israel, and the idea is it shoots down tiny little pipsqueak rockets that are like
right. I'm glad you made that point. Because that's shooting down like Kajushkas, like 120 millimeter little things like this. That's something like that couldn't even engage a target unless it was already like 50,000 feet above the surface.
Right, exactly. So
it is not. It's a large missile that is like high energy. In fact, one of my favorite pictures of it launching is there's a curlicue smoke trail, and I actually researched why that happens, and when a target is too close to the Earth, the booster has to actually waste energy.
Oh, so to slow itself down.
For it to not get too fast or like be in the wrong position, it actually has to sometimes do a spiral to burn energy. So when it gets up to 100,000 feet, it's not moving too fast and is in the right position.
Right.
But so it's absolutely not something that could even intercept a plane, let alone a rocket.
Right, exactly. But
I can totally understand how people would confuse the Israeli Iron Dome and the other missile intercept things with. This is not that system. This is something that outside of the atmosphere blows something up.
Right. And then
the reason that actually isn't the worst part of it. What the Chinese actually hate about it is the radar that goes with it.
Okay.
Which is a big ass. It's a semi-truck X-band radar that can pretty much see a golf ball at 1,000 miles.
Okay.
And that is if you just park some missiles next to China, they're realistic. Let's face it, there's probably a missile-guided submarine, one of the refitted Ohios, sitting within range of China at any given time that has 150 Tomahawk missiles. What they hate is the radar more than anything else.
And all of these anti-missile systems, again, the entire point of them is that they have to have it's not just it's not it's not the shoulder-fired Stinger or whatever where you point it at something and it goes and gets it. There's a radar system. There's people who have to run it.
This is like a several hundred man operation.
Right, it's a huge and it's distributed. Different people have different jobs. Different people have different stuff they have to do. There's a hardware piece. There's a software piece. There's a human communications piece.
No, actually, that's a good point because I don't think people understand how big even a normal missile battery. I always like to use the one that shot down the Malaysian flight in over Ukraine. That's not the missile that did that is a 90-man operation, operating a battery. It's not it's not something like a rebel can just pop up hey, I just pointed this to there. No, it's a major operation,
right.
And this is even bigger operation because it's got a radar that can spot a golf ball at 1,000 miles. It is, you need. It would not only require a huge amount of technicians on the military side. I'd be surprised if there weren't several contractors permanently on site.
Right, and so the reason that this is sort of a sort of almost like a Cold War sort of story is if we put this in South Korea, and again you look at a map, it's going to be able to see into a lot of very, very, very important territory in China.
Exactly.
So we can say all we want to. Oh, we're just here to deal with this North Korean missile threat, but of course if you're China, that's almost the last place you want that. It's like that or Hong Kong are the places where.
Well, right. And they feel ringed in, and they the first island chain between Thailand has a similar radar, a permanent larger installation. Obviously, Japan does too. So they feel as soon as I leave my coast, I'm already under constant surveillance.
Right. Right.
Like, American planes are watching me, radars are watching me, so they don't like this. It's also important to note, I think, that that is the entire reason the U.S. did it.
Right.
That is like it's like 70 missiles. Maybe if somebody lobs something, I mean, North Korea has enough Scud missiles, like simple, like lob something, 100 miles that way, that it could really. There's no hope. It's important to note that there's no hope of that. If North Korea had a nuclearized warhead on a missile, which I don't believe they have yet, but they will. But I don't think they've miniaturized it to the point where they could just pop it on a missile and have it reliably go bang. But if they did, they have enough short-range missiles that could just lob over to Seoul. I mean, they could practically put it in an artillery gun.
Right.
That, like, it's kind of a feel-good weapon. It's a political weapon. It's basically saying, like, hey, China, if you don't, and again, getting back to the radar, it's a message that says, if you don't fucking do something about this, we're just going to annoy the shit out of you. And the next step is, like, making Japan nuclear. And even Hillary Clinton was actually on the record as saying, we will surround you with ABM radars. She actually had a statement that actually said that.
Wow.
Nobody only people like you and I would notice or care about that, but that's a huge statement. But she's basically saying that, like, we will isolate you and watch you constantly unless you do something about this. Like, we're just going to point radars at you and you won't be able to move.
Right.
And that's huge because as Americans, we're like, well, we can test whatever we want. Nobody's going to watch.
Right.
Like, we have two oceans, an entire Midwest, Nevada, like all of Nevada is basically like an off-limit zone where nobody can look at. We take it for granted that the United States can test or do whatever it wants in its own hemisphere. China, understandably, feels completely constricted when, we have Thailand, there's Japan,
and there's South Korea, there's all those places, yes. Right.
They feel ringed in. And it is intentional by the U.S. the same way we ringed in the Soviet Union.
Right.
It's completely intentional, like, as much as possible. But they like, even like put a diesel submarine out and it's like not expect that somebody's listening to it. So they don't like it when a radar is pointing, like, directly up into their shit, which is understandable, but also, I mean, that's the whole point. Is like, well, curb your mad dog, or we're going to keep doing horrible stuff to you.
Right, and then
basically the message.
And then also, I think that again, even if there is a submarine or a group of submarines, or even if there's things in Japan or somewhere else, what they're talking about with putting me in South Korea is
it's all about you, man.
It's all about me, man. What they're talking about putting me there is that it's a permanent thing. So we're going to send in support groups for it. We're going to, like, it's going to stay there. Again, once you get a missile system like this set up in another country, it's an enormous bureaucratic hassle ever to get rid of it, right? Because
and the optics. Actually, I'm curious after the South Korean election whether he says he wants to talk to North Korea, and he says but I feel like the real politics, just like Trump hasn't actually really changed anything really drastically yet, except for a lot of noise. I feel like when the South Korean president, like, takes power, as much as he says he's anti-THAAD, like, once he actually meets, when the rubber meets the road with the actual South Korean military, they're going to be like, nope.
Right. Well, and
I think it'd be really hard to roll back that decision. In fact, I think the decision was rushed partially because of North Korea's belligerence, but I think a lot of it was rushed to take advantage of a window in South Korea just not having the military is like, yeah, we can get away with whatever we want right now. We don't even have a president.
Right. Well,
I feel like there was like a rush to do that.
And there was one of the things that I think that I assume if we keep on doing this, we're always going to be talking about is the sort of relationship between political will and military will and all those sorts of things. And if people haven't been paying attention, South Korea has just gone through a convulsion of political problems that really, I mean, again, it's hard to relate
It
this
makes
to
us look
something.
like silly.
Yeah, I mean, and what happened is the former president, who came from a conservative family. Her father was a '70s and '80s big shot in South Korean politics. And she was elected on a fairly standard set of South Korean political goals, and it turns out that she was as dirty and corrupt and awful as an Asian politician can be, and that's saying something.
Yeah,
So she
that's the
was,
standard.
again, like, United States, you can do a lot of really weird, shady stuff in politics, and there's a lot of lobbies and this and that. She was caught doing things where, like, her political supporters were giving money to charities, and the charities paid for her daughter's equestrian lessons in Switzerland. I mean, it was just, it was, I mean,
I think even by Asian standards, I think it was an unprecedented level of corruption.
it was horrible. It was blatant. It was obvious, and also she was as tone deaf as any American banker was during the financial crisis, because her attitude was sort of like, don't hate the player, hate the game. And did very, very little. And she was not only impeached and removed from being president, but the day after she lost her diplomatic immunity, she was arrested. They did a perp walk, or the Korean version of a perp walk, with her. So there's that has been going on now for, I mean, the scandal's been going on for more than a year, but that whole sort of political convulsion has been happening for at least 6 months, 8 months, a year, a long time. And then there were elections.
I mean, like the initial problem started, like, I'd go as far back as a year ago, but
Yes.
the arrests and the impeachment were recent. And I definitely have to agree with you. Like, it's kind of unprecedented level of corruption, and also an unprecedented level of somebody actually calling them out on corruption.
Yes.
Like, that doesn't usually happen.
Yes, and also I think a lot of I mean, this is true all over Asia, and I think it's especially true in Japan and Korea, that the political and economic elites have become accustomed to an extraordinary lack of transparency about what they do, and that is changing changing all over the world. But I think that maybe those political elites are even less prepared for it than our political elites are. That they're just used to not having to answer any questions to anybody ever under any circumstances. And now,
Actually, I never thought of it that way, but I think that's a really good point.
yeah,
That,
and it's the internet, and it's different populations.
Outside of perhaps our current president, like, most of the people that are in our political apparatus understand the blowback of if you make a weird announcement or you're arrested or something. Like, I feel like in Asia, it's kind of like a no, wink, wink, nod, nod. Like, so this is kind of a massive local political change,
Right, and
in the way business is handled.
right, and I also would say that you are correct, that sort of level of political chaos meant that a lot of decisions could be made about foreign policy, because there was no one at the switch. There was nobody in charge. Everybody who was in charge of the government was concerned about elections and their own scandals, and who has my phone number on their iPhone, and who was paying for my kids to go to school in Switzerland. And then suddenly,
Actually, I think I think this is a great time to draw two foreign policies together. The same way that I think that Department of Defense is kind of running the show, and definitely the Department of Defense, not the State Department, is running the show in Syria. And there are 25 trucks and 6 howitzers delivered like 2 days ago, like heavy weapons. Like, also, I just want to go back for a quick moment and say, like, we just announced that we're helping the Kurds now. Like, I was like, we've been helping the Kurds. We've had like C-17 delivering shit there since like December of 2015.
right.
So, like, that statement is disingenuous. Like, that's basically us just saying, like, hey, that thing that you hate, that we know you hate, we're just going to be public about it. Like, we're like, hey, we kissed that girl and cheated on you. Like it's basically it is just coming right the fuck out. It's not acknowledging anything that anyone who's paying attention didn't already know.
Right.
I know that, like, we're like, oh yeah, we're gonna like helicopter these Kurds in, but we're not giving them any ammo.
Right.
Like, no, they never had. It said no one ever. We're just coming out and saying you can go suck a dick, Recepticon.
Right.
Like, so, and I think that is exactly the same kind of thing that's going on in South Korea, only with China. So wow, that was a major mind fart.
That's right.
It's basically in the weak moment where like Korea didn't have way to say no, because this is something that the United States has wanted to do for a long time.
Exactly.
Because
this is
like the United States, if you look at like a map of like anti-ballistic missile radars, they literally have one in almost every time zone, and this is something they've been building up for a long time.
Right.
And they want more of them put down anywhere they can, and they especially love needling China. And this was basically a weak moment in South Korean policy, where like I think the South Korean military, kind of the same way like in Kurdistan, like the U.S. military is like, hey, the president doesn't give a shit about what we do. All right, let's go do this right.
Let's
we can do whatever we want. Like we have a blank check. I think the South Korean military is like, hey, it's on a golf course. I don't care what fucking elites we screw it. Like, let's just throw it there. Like, I don't care.
Exactly.
Like I feel like there's like a window. They found like a window where they could just dump on any missile ballistic. Think about that actually. Like in a country like an Asian country, like a really elitist, like really they just. Can you picture like if anyone dropped a THAAD on like Trump's golf course?
I'm trying, yeah, and on Mar-a-Lago. We're deploying THAAD to Mar-a-Lago. Exactly.
Which also, I kind of think that deserves its own conversation by itself. But seriously, I think there was like a window of political lack of will and uncertainty where the South Korean military is like, yeah, we're making this happen. We want this to happen, and we're pissed at China. We're afraid that like this is a real problem, and like we're making this happen, and you guys like are too unorganized to stop us.
Right, and
the U.S. has like always wanted to like just slip its dick into that.
Right, and so, I think it's one of those situations where you ask for forgiveness, not permission. So when there's the opportunity,
exactly,
you've wanted to do it for a long time anyway, and then suddenly the people who would normally be tut-tutting and saying, that might not be such a great strategic idea, they're not around. So you call your boys. In what will be the nickname for the Air Force? It's not like it's not Foggy Bottom. It's not Langley. We'll be the Air Force nickname. You call your friends in the Air Force and say let's do this.
I call them the Air Farce.
The Air Force. Okay, there we go. So you call your boys in the Air Farce and say let's go do it. And again, it's going to be very, very difficult to suddenly change your mind and rotate that back. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of it.
Even on the Korean side, it's like a major political issue that has. Once you've done it, you might like, and I feel like the current president does want to probably undo it, but it's already done. So like blocking it from ever happening would be a thing that could be accomplished. Taking it away
once it's there is a whole different level of trouble.
I honestly believe that this is like a thing between the Department of Defense of the United States and the Korean equivalent, where there's like, hey, we have a window. We can finally do this thing that we both want.
Right.
And like, there's no political person who could possibly stand in our way because we don't even have a political. Nobody's in charge of this country right now. We can just sneak this in, and once it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like, it'll be he would have to actually stake his political capital on making this go away, and have to lose voters just to make it go away.
Right.
So I honestly believe like. The Defense Departments of Korea and the United States actually just ran a scam.
Oh well, no. I think what you're talking about was completely spot on, and I think that the only thing that we should probably think about covering beyond that is, trying. One of the questions is, of course, that there is definitely like a lot of other situations in the world. There's sort of a great power. Piece of this, which is the U.S. and China sort of jousting back and forth, and I think, as you said quite accurately, regional powers are very, very capable and very, very savvy about using those situations to enhance their own goals. So I mean, in a certain sense, there was. I mean, who gives a shit about Korea? Let's start with that. I mean, is Korea going to roll into the United States? No. Is Korea going to roll into China? No. So in a certain sense, the both parties are always trying to sort of play their own advantage, and especially in that situation because the lines are so carefully drawn. I mean, North Korea has one friend in the world, and South.
but I want to ask, like, how do you feel about how much North Korea is in news right now and there's a major political issue?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that well, I mean, one of the questions that we had before the election was pretty much every new administration in the U.S. Everyone lines up. It's like the new kid in class, right? Like you gotta find out if he's tough or not. You gotta find out if he's a wuss or not. You gotta find out if he'll let you cheat off his test or not. And I think every country does that. So I think that what North Korea has been doing is, in a certain sense, testing a new administration. I think China's been doing the exact same thing. But it does seem as if this is a higher degree of testing a new administration by the North Koreans for their own purposes. And so, I mean, no one really takes a North Korean nuclear threat seriously from an actual military standpoint, except for the South Koreans, right? They're the only country in the world that really has to worry about North Korea murdering people inside of their own country. But so I think what North Korea has been doing is very, very specifically to try to rile things up for their own ends as well. But I mean, it's hard to tell how much of that is just internal crazy, how much of that is, trying to reframe their relationship with China, and how much of that is actually some sort of attempt to be a major player on the international stage.
I do feel the Korean pouring the market up kind of the right amount. Maybe not the current leader, but but he would scream, be crazy and whatever, but whenever like the rubber hit the road, he was a rational actor.
Right. And I mean,
totally. I'm not totally. His son is quite as rational, but I still think in general, like he has, relatively normal needs and wants.
Right. Well,
what I find interesting is that like it's become a hot button issue now that he could possibly hit the U.S. with ICBM, and kind of children. I'm just like, what do you mean? Like that's what I grew up with. Like
right, yeah, absolutely.
Like, to me, it's just like whatever. Like like I grew up, day after when I was in grade school. So like to me, it's just like yeah, they might be able to hit us with one nuke, and then we would basically annihilate the Korean population. Like.
Right.
But there seems to be it seems to be a hot button political issue right now. I'm kind of curious what thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think the distinction between the pops and the son is a good one. I can't imagine that the pops would have murdered one of his rivals in an airport in Malaysia with nerve gas. That's
especially the way it was done was kind of reckless and
yeah,
it was a dick. Like it was a glove thrown down.
Yeah, and I think clearly that like that to me seems a little bit national unhinged, which is not a super great sign. So I don't know. I think this is something that maybe
that's a valid point. I mean, we've heard lots of rumors about him killing and stuff like that, but that's like one of the actual tangible things that we can say like. You didn't need to kill this guy. It really wasn't important, and you did it.
And not only did it, but did it in a way that was public enough. I mean, you couldn't get much more public than murdering someone in another airport on a camera.
It's like
with a nerve agent,
like rape some Syrian.
Right. I mean, it's just like that to me was a sign of like I said,
not a rational actor,
being a little unhinged. But it's also a person who's in charge of a very, very large country, and also I mean, so what one might say that seemed to be a little bit personally unhinged, but at the same time, he's not been unhinged when it comes to taking advantage of whatever strategic opportunities he has in that area, and also trying to drag the Chinese along doing things that they probably don't want to do. So maybe I mean that's the old. I mean, we spent hundreds of years trying to figure out whether or not Hamlet was crazy, and maybe Hamlet was crazy when he wanted to be.
And I would say Kim Jong-il actually was absolutely like Putin-esque, like
yeah.
Like that level of like he's like kind of seems crazy, but he seems so crazy you're not gonna call him on it. Like, you know, like down this wall. Like I feel like Un is like I feel like Kim Jong Il, like to be in North Korea, that is the guy who was just like, yep, I play with the big powers. I play with the United States.
Right.
I'm afraid, and I roll.
And
maybe his son isn't quite up to snuff, but I feel he's still stuff nuked or destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I would say that at this point we should call this episode number 1. How does that sound to you?
I'm good with that.
Absolutely. So just to sort of close out in the official sense, Radio Squid Jigger, episode 1. Thank you very much. Anybody out there who has actually listened to this, remember, we're looking for 5 people out of 7 billion. So even if you listen to this and thought it was pointless and crazy and 2 people who should just shut the hell up, forward this on to any one of those people who you think might qualify to be one of the other 5 of the 7 billion. And
absolutely, and also I never got to use my pun that I feel like ISIS is kind of between Iraq and a hard place.
Oh,
I just want to throw that out there.
Exactly. All
they're
right.
They're moving down the Euphrates, valley, and I'm just kind of thinking they're, I like really prepare that one ahead of time. It's like, I never got to throw that one down.
Didn't use it. They're between a rock and a hard place. So then we will save that for episode 2 and go on from there. Excellent.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Josh. Now.